Then what do typically, and maybe there is no typical, but what do capital campaigns kind of broadly look like? What's a normal, typical size, dollar amount, length, duration? Yeah, you go.
Going back to my first comment about sort of the wealth inequality, this what I'm about to say is why I thought that. They tend to be pyramid shaped, right? Now there are some campaigns that are square shaped, sombrero shaped. Most are pyramid shaped. And if you're not a pyramid shape, you're not doing anything wrong, right? And in some ways you could sort of argue that, you're a little more broad, which is good, right? And you're a little more protected. But, you can have a pyramid shape and be protected as long as you're sort of fostering those major gift relationships. But the answer to your question, Lee, is pyramid, the Pareto principle, right? This sort of idea that 80% of the funding comes from 20% of the funders. That is really closely aligned to the typical capital campaign. We ask people what percentage of your dollars raised came from the top 20 gifts. So it's not quite the Pareto principle definition, but that number was 72%. So 72% of their goal attainment came from the top 20 gifts. And there weren't a lot of variations that were either pulling that number up or down. There were some corner cases that were maybe a little flatter. And of course, there were some campaigns where maybe 70 or 80% of the goal attainment came from one gift, right, from that lead donor. But in general, you're trying to raise 5 million, you're probably going to have $1 million lead gift, 20%, and then maybe a couple 500s, and then 3 or 4 250s, and you can kind of see how that flattens out towards the bottom. But that's usually what they look like. And if you're listening to this and like maybe you're in a campaign or you just finished one and you didn't look like that, that's okay. Like, no judgment, no one's doing anything wrong there. But that sort of average does point to, perhaps the need to be fostering some closer relationships, as many close relationships as you can with those high capacity donors.
Major gift donors. So you described, or you said you've been surprised by that 100% goal attainment.
Yeah,
Uh, so what then, and you also said, well, maybe we're setting that bar a little bit low. Are
maybe.
there other components to what success could look like?
Yeah, there were some dots that we connected. One that comes to mind is doing a feasibility study. That was sort of a glaring one. A feasibility study is technically optional, which is one reason that I call it out, because it's something that some people skip, sometimes for good reasons, usually for bad reasons. But there were a lot of differences in sort of those qualitative or actually quantitative results of the study. So we asked people, did you do a study? And then I compared their answers to all the other questions. We also asked people how they did a study. Did you have a third party donor interviewer? Did you do it yourself? And there were some interesting differences there. But in general, I would tell people to skip a feasibility study at sort of at your own risk, because it is ostensibly, step one of the solicitation process. You're talking to potential lead donors, you're socializing your plans, you're kind of getting feedback. It's that old adage of ask for advice, get money, versus asking for money, get advice.
Yep.
It's the former, which is what's kind of fun about it. That was a big one. Staffing also didn't point to changes in success rate necessarily, but did point to the length of a campaign. Campaigns tended to drag on longer when there wasn't as much investment in staff, consultant, and also feasibility study was another area where things were kind of dragging out. Which sort of, makes sense to me. That kind of tracks with our experience as well, where, if you don't do a study, you don't test the goal, you may get to 5 million out of a $10 million goal and suddenly get stuck. And then you have to stay in the campaign longer to make up that delta. And then also just, plainly, many hands make light work, and you can work through, and we were talking about this before
Right,
with
less
our
is more.
businesses, but more is more, right? So it's an investment, and sometimes it can be a chicken and the egg because you need to do a lot of work in the beginning of a campaign before any money starts to come in, which can be hard.